Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku time traveled and took control of his destiny? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. All Might couldn't help the incredible amount of guilt realizing he had dropped the bottle with the slime villain. However, his time limit was already up, so he would have great difficulty dealing with the villain without doing some considerable damage to himself. Seeing the boy he rescued from this same villain earlier bolt past the heroes, he couldn't help but watch. What happened next threw everyone off. The boy lightly tapped something under his shirt. The second he got within a certain distance of the villain, the sludge fell away. It was clear that this wasn't the doing of the villain if his surprised shrieks was any indication. The teen promptly slammed his fist into the other teen's stomach, causing him to throw up. "God damn it, Deku! What the hell was that for you, Bifidi? You were suffocating on that sludge. Unless you really want to ingest whatever gross crap that villain was made up with." The teen looked rather scathingly at the heroes. "You're welcome to collect this creep anytime now, you know," he said loudly. All Might watched in disbelief as some of the heroes backed off immediately when their quirks abruptly stopped working when they got close to the teen. All Might subtly moved to the side where the heroes were already giving the teen a lecture for jumping in like that. Something told him to pull out his phone and record this, so he did. He would not be disappointed and would be saving this video for later viewing. "Excuse me? Bakugo was suffocating while you lot were busy pretending to be heroes. I refuse to be present at a funeral I could have prevented just because the heroes were taking their sweet time to save the hostage." "You should have waited," said Kamui, feeling distinctly uncomfortable at the expression on the teen's face. "For what? For another hero to show up and do your DMN job," snarked the teen. "He was on the verge of blacking out and being smothered to death because none of you had the ball to try and come up with a half-butted plan to free him. Endeavor is 5 blocks away, and by the time he bothered to come here, Bakugo would already be dead. Unlike you idiots, I happen to live 2 blocks away from his house and my mom happens to be friends with his. I would have had to deal with the guilt of knowing her son was dead and I could have done something to save him. Nobody asked you to save me, stupid Deku? Shut up, Bakugo. Unless you want me to remind you why the teachers quit trying to do more than suspend me for a day every time your ego gets too big," the teen shot back. Bakugo glowered at him. How did you stop that villain?" asked MT Lady. "And why shouldn't we charge you with vigilantism right now?" said Kamui, feeling a bit sour at being chewed out by a civilian. All Might watched in disbelief as the teen pulled out a card. "I have a personal defense device on me. And no, you can't have it. Also, the only real thing I did was punch Bakugo to make sure he didn't swallow any of that crap by accident with the villain unable to smother him anymore." "What's this?" said Lady, confused. "The law allowing civilians to own personal defense devices specifically designed against quirks, provided that they only have a passive effect," said the teen smugly. "And your claim of vigilantism wouldn't hold up in court and you'd be laughed out of any precinct you tried to take me to. Not even the school principal could do anything against me for using it in class." Kamui seethed. All Might was in disbelief that the teen had a card printed up that allowed him to have some sort of device that would protect him from quirks. And the boy was right that the only thing he actually did was hit the other teen to make him throw up the sludge. He didn't actually lay a finger on the sludge villain or do anything to him outside of using a device that neutralized his quirk. Then he noticed the teen wasn't finished with the heroes. Frankly, it's no wonder All Might is overworked, if this the best you can do. He has to keep picking up your slack because you never step up and actually do your job, said the teen scathingly. "You're not seriously comparing us to the symbol of peace?" said Kamui, incredulous. "There's no way we can beat him." "No, I'm saying that maybe you lot should start stepping up on your game for once. Your showing was absolutely terrible and you were all flailing your arms around against a villain because you were too close-minded to actually try something to free the hostage that was literally dying in front of you," he said bluntly. "Heroes are more than just flashy quirks. Being a hero means being in a situation where the odds are against you and having the courage to get up and try something to turn that around anyway, even if it has a chance of failing. Why don't you try doing what's right instead of taking the easy way out? All Might saved the video and mentally made a note to track that boy down later. He had found his successor. Izuku had long since come to terms with the fact that the experiment with a time-based quirk that had exploded had sent him into his past self. On the downside, he had to go through PBRDY twice and had to go through getting his license all over again. On the plus side, he still had his memories and more importantly the knowledge of how to even the odds against people who actually had quirks. One of his greatest regrets was the fact that he was so powerless to save Bakugo from that slime villain because the device he had created to neutralize quirks wasn't around then. Being able to save that arrogant idiot's life was something he would never regret. It had been the driving reason why he worked on so many devices and gadgets to deal with villains even though he was quirkless. He ended up becoming the only pro hero without a quirk and was DMN proud of that fact. At least this time he had a proper head start on becoming a hero again. He actually got the martial arts training he needed last time, most of his gadgets were made and a few were even patented which brought in a lot of money since other heroes were using them, and this time he was brave enough to speak up and make Bakugo back down when his ego got out of control. His plan was to enter UA through the support hero program, then make his way into the hero class through the sports festival. He hadn't known the first time that it was possible to be promoted to the hero class from the showing made at the sports festival until Aizawa-sensei told him while he was training him in martial arts. Aizawa was probably going to give him a long lecture about jumping in like that, but he didn't really care. Izuku was so busy planning on how to explain this to his martial arts teacher that he was completely caught off guard when All Might appeared before him. On an unrelated note, he finally had an answer to a mystery that had been bugging him for years about why All Might and his secretary had identical birthdays and why they died the exact same day. "You want me to inherit your quirk?" said Izuku stunned. He vaguely recalled the hero who took over for All Might and had never been impressed with him. He had no idea that the quirk his favorite hero had was something that had been passed to him from another. Well, he had already come to terms with the fact he wasn't going to let the past happen as it did the first time when he started making his gadgets. And to be honest, this was an opportunity he would be an idiot to pass up. Sometime later, Toshinori was slightly confused by the irritated look on Aizawa's face. Hisashi looked more amused than anything. "What's this I hear about you training my student?" "Eraser's jealous," cackled Hisashi. "What do you mean your student?" asked Toshinori. "You picked Izuku as your successor, right?" asked Hisashi. He nodded. "Shura's been training Izuku in martial arts since he was 9, and I've been helping the kid test out his little gadgets since he was 9.5. "You mean like whatever it was he used to deal with that sludge villain?" asked Toshinori intently. Hisashi looked gleeful. "He calls it the Eraser Kitty. It's like a wide area version of Eraser's quirk, just in device form. Once that thing is activated, all quirks are basically nullified around it, outside of physical ones like tails and the like. He has a few of those made, and from the police report Eraser got, he probably used the mid-range one. He could make a fortune with those," said Toshinori. "He already does," said Aizawa. "He owns the patent to the disposable one that most of the police have been using, though he refuses to hand over the stronger ones." "Why?" "They're his trump card for when he gets into the support class," said Hisashi. "Izuku's planning to get promoted from the support class into the hero through the sports festival because he doesn't have a quirk to let him jump right into the hero class from the entrance exam. It was a plan that was almost certain to work, because weapons weren't allowed in the entrance exam, which Aizawa always found rather ridiculous because some quirks that would be perfect for hero work sometimes didn't work that effectively against the robots used in the exams. Like his, for instance. "I don't want to impose on your student," said Toshinori. "It's fine. Izuku is a major fan of All Might anyway, so this was probably a dream come true. Shura's just jealous because it means less time with his favorite student," said Hisashi. "I am not jealous. I'm just concerned what sort of training he plans to do, considering it might conflict with the training he already does with me," snapped Aizawa. He was jealous, he just didn't want to admit it out loud. He had no idea Izuku was already training with another hero. Besides, this was the first time he had trained anyone, so maybe having another hero's help in getting Izuku's body ready to handle one for all wouldn't be too bad. Aizawa took one look at the training schedule and immediately saw several flaws. For one thing, it would conflict with the training he did with Izuku in martial arts. For another, it was based on getting someone whose stats were much lower than Izuku's to a certain level of physical stamina. Between the three of them, they were able to come up with a far more reasonable workout schedule. Izuku would be sore as hell, but as long as he followed the regimen they created, he would be able to handle one for all at least a full month before the actual entrance exam for the hero class. At least if he was unable to handle the practicals for the hero exam, he'd still have a chance to go support like he originally planned. Though Toshinori did put up a token protest when they dragged him to the Midoriya home for dinner. Knowing Izuku, he's already come up with a plausible explanation for why you took an interest in him and why he suddenly developed a quirk so late. So shut up and socialize, said Aizawa grumpily. As it turned out, Izuku had come up with a good cover story for why he would be spending time around Toshinori and by extension All Might that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. He also had an explanation for why he suddenly gained a quirk. Officially, Toshinori had come to meet the super fan, who had sent a rather thoughtful letter to All Might's hero office asking if it was possible to intern with him. Toshinori happened to be present during the whole sludge incident and had been impressed by Izuku's courage, and had recognized signs that Izuku's quirk developed late like All Might. He brought Izuku to All Might's attention, and Izuku was now an unpaid intern at All Might's hero office while he got training to fully awaken his latent quirk in time to hopefully attend UA. All perfectly logical and a reasonable explanation that would stand up to most scrutiny while hiding the truth behind one for all and why Izuku would be spending a lot of time around a grown man he had only just met. He was a minor after all. Hisashi looked at Aizawa with amusement. So when do you think Izuku will tell All Might the truth about where he came up with those toys of his? He asked. Who knows, said Aizawa. And he didn't really care either way. He still had trouble believing that Izuku had gotten caught up in an experiment with a time-based quirk that blew him all the way into his past self. If not for the personal knowledge that he knew Demon well, a child his age would never have been able to get otherwise, he never would have believed it in the first place. However, Izuku had known specific details and personal information about Aizawa that only his closest friends knew, despite the fact it was their first meeting. He also knew Hisashi never would have divulged that information to a kid. Bakugo was livid that he had to be saved by Deku, and it only got worse when he found out that the quirkless kid in his class was receiving actual training from All Might after the hero's secretary recognized his latent quirk for what it was. About the only saving grace he had was the fact Deku wasn't the type to brag about his training or the fact he saved him with those stupid toys. However, deep down Bakugo could at least admit to himself that if Izuku hadn't intervened when he did, there was a high chance he would have died. He had been on the verge of blacking out completely when Izuku used that annoying toy of his to force the sludge villain to let him go. Considering the pro heroes were openly doing jack squat at the time, and were waiting for another hero with a quirk that could actually affect the sludge BSRD, he would admit he was slightly grateful. Even if he was still sad about the punch to the gut. Though he would also admit he could understand why Deku had done it. The thought of swallowing any of that crap made him want to throw up anyway. The thing he didn't get was when the hell did Deku of all people get so strong? He could still remember the power behind that hit, and it was hard for him to reconcile the idea of the quirkless kid in his class being that strong. Any other time, Deku would use that annoying toy of his to turn off his quirk before trapping him with some wires. Bakugo had learned the hard way that the teachers wouldn't do anything about it because Deku apparently had video of Bakugo starting the fight, and the only thing he did was finish it in a way that wouldn't actually harm him. The teachers were more worried about being sued for the other things on the video, and had frantically searched for the hidden cameras Deku had put up because he wanted evidence that he was being deliberately harassed by the school. The principal was sweating big time when Deku played those videos, before calmly and rather viciously pointing out all the ways any half-decent lawyer would rip the school's reputation to shreds with it. And the teachers couldn't confiscated the discrete body cams because not only did they have no idea what it looked like, but any attempts to make a new rule against them would have them dealing with the courts. Deku was the weirdest kid he had ever met, but the fact was that he was also the most cunning. It still set him off that the quirkless kid was able to kick his butt and kept him from being the top dog of his school though. Todoroki Sakura felt like she was torn between two worlds. It wasn't entirely her fault. She had lived with Endeavor's abuse for years and never thought to question it, silently suffering because the man couldn't stand the fact that he always came up second best to All Might. As such, she had allowed herself to be mistaken for a rather feminine-looking boy by the name of Shudo. After her mother was sent to live in a care facility because of the incident, the only one who bothered to call her Sakura anymore was her older sister. Except that shortly after she woke up from being taken to the hospital to save her eye, she realized she had memories that shouldn't be there. Memories of her older self, who was an incredibly bitter and isolated young woman who had fought tooth and nail against the way Endeavor had raised her to be, and who had found love but was too scared to take a chance on it. Her older self had moved as far away from Endeavor as she could, and had gone on to become a hero in America. It was only after she made a name for herself that had nothing to do with her father that she had moved back, though not in the same house or prefecture as Endeavor. That was when she met him. A man who had unofficially taken over the position All Might had left behind on his death. Deku, the symbol of hope. He was a quirkless hero who still managed to take out the villains and even held a legitimate hero's license. Seeing him in action, it was so easy to forget that he had never been born with a special power, and that he fought entirely with his mind and the inventions he made. The first time she met him, she knew immediately that he didn't see her as Endeavor's daughter. He just saw her. It was only natural that when Sakura woke up and found herself in her much younger body that she tried to figure out what happened. The only explanation that made any sense was that she had accidentally got caught up in the blast of whatever experiment her secret lover was doing with the little girl he rescued that had a time-based quirk. They had been attempting to see if she could control how far back she could revert time and if she could move things forward, when the device she was testing on reacted badly and blew up. Which meant she spent 7 very lonely years until she was old enough for Yue. Unknown to Endeavor, there was one alteration she was going to make on her application. She was going to politely request that she be moved to the dorms and that they not mention it to her father. Principal Nizu discreetly took her aside and was rather understanding that she wanted to be a hero without being in her father's shadow all the time. And since Endeavor could pay for it anyway, they subtly tacked on the cost of living in the dorms into the bill. Endeavor was beyond sad when he figured it out, but by that time it was too late and Nizu was more than happy to insinuate that the hero thought Yue's ability to train his child was subpar. Endeavor was many things, but an idiot was not one of them. He knew DMN well the principal would have the press eating him alive if he tried to make his daughter move back because he wanted to retain his control over her. At least she agreed to keep wearing the boy's uniform, if only out of habit. So long as she was wearing the uniform and didn't violate the privacy of the boys by changing with them, the staff would keep their silence on her gender. She wasn't really looking forward to her class. She remembered that little pervert Mineta with far too much disgust. This time she wouldn't hesitate, she was going to freeze his ball and threaten to unman him if she caught him perving on the girls. With how small he was, it wouldn't be that hard. So you could imagine her confusion when she realized that there were 2 faces she didn't recognize from her class in 1A. A hot-headed teen with an explosive quirk, a really foul attitude and mouth to match. It wouldn't be until she heard his name that any recognition came to her. And then only because Izuku would sometimes comment on his greatest regret while drunk off his butt, about being unable to help Kaken. Of the fact that he had only developed the eraser kitty after his childhood friend had been killed during a villain attack because the heroes had stood there and done nothing. Todoroki stared at him in shock. Bakugo Katsuki had been killed in her original timeline. So if he was alive now and in her class, then what else had changed? The other oddity was a teen with green hair that was listening to music while doodling something in his notebook. He looked really familiar, but that was about it. One thing she was certain of was that he wasn't in her class the first time either. She kept her focus on the green-haired teen. Mostly because the shade looked remarkably similar to his, and she recognized the odd pendant around his neck as a mid-range eraser kitty. So far the only sign Izuku had come back as well was the one-time use eraser kittens being made available to the police. As far as she could remember, those weren't developed for another 3 years at best. She really hoped that she found Izuku soon. She needed his optimism. "How did your first class of the year go?" asked Hizashi. "Interesting. I think I saw the beginnings of a crush between Midoriya and Endeavor's kid, said Aizawa. Hisashi nearly spat out his tea. Seriously? He kept glancing in her direction and had this weirdly fond look in his eyes. Though she kept giving that Bakugo kid weird looks. Almost like he had a second head or something, said Aizawa. Actually, it was more in line with the expression one would get when they saw someone they thought was dead turning out to be alive. Though not the relieved look, but the look was closer to the shock and disbelief expression one would get at a stranger being alive. What Izuku hadn't mentioned was that in his original timeline, Bakugo died because of the sludge villain. He also wasn't aware All Might had been present at the scene, but had kept back because he had already used up his time limit. Though to be fair, Izuku only found that out when Toshinori happened to share the video that he had taken of the chewing out Izuku had given the heroes on the scene. It was Izuku's lecture that had convinced All Might to make the boy his heir. Something he hadn't regretted once, especially after the showing of the entrance exam. So we might have some entertainment watching the daughter of Endeavor and All Might's heir dating? Fun, said Midnight, having walked in. Considering this is the same kid who basically alienated himself from DMN near his entire school and made the adults cry for mommy because he had a pretty solid case that would utterly destroy their school's reputation? I say we start the betting pools now on whether they date or not, said Hisashi wickedly. I know I'm going to regret saying this, but I second that, said Aizawa. Toshinori walked in. What's this about Izuku's school? It's like this. His old school was so eager to get that Bakugo kid into UA that they pretty much ignored the fact his ego was growing out of control. Izuku got tired of being his victim, so he came up with the eraser kitty. Add in the martial arts training he's been getting from Aizawa, and the kid didn't stand a chance, said Hisashi. I still can't believe he named them Eraser Kitty, said Aizawa exasperated. But it's such a cute name and easy to remember, laughed Cementos. I know, right? Said Hisashi laughing. Anyway, the teachers didn't like the fact that the quirkless kid beat up their best bet to a UA admission, so they called Izuku and his mom in and threatened to suspend or even expel him. What they didn't know was that Izuku was tired of being mocked because his quirk manifested late, so he put up a whole bunch of hidden cameras and was even wearing a body cam during the entire incident. The kid straight up threatened to sue because he had video evidence going back 3 months showing they were doing nothing about the subtle bullying because he didn't have a quirk. And the videos all showed Bakugo being the main aggressor with the teachers and most of the students showing open approval for it, said Aizawa darkly amused. The principal DMN near said himself when Izuku said he'd take the case to court and even make sure the media heard about the fact that the school administration allowed open harassment of a quirkless kid and basically let public opinion trash their reputation. Toshinori winced and had to admit that was a pretty vicious move. In the end, the matter was dropped, and the teachers spent a month trying to find the cameras before giving up and leaving him alone. And they couldn't ban the body cam because Izuku claimed he had brought it so that he could replay the lesson of the day to help further his studies, and because it doubled as a person protection device, said Hisashi amused. You're kidding, said Toshinori. A body cam's only purpose is to record events, nothing else. It's not illegal and anyone can get their hands on them for a little cash, said Aizawa. Just like they couldn't take away the eraser kitty because he was using it as a passive defense against his classmates who harassed him for not having a special ability. I doubt they even knew about it, said Hisashi amused. I bet the kid would make a killing with them, said Midnight. He already does. He has the patent to the eraser kittens, which are one-time use versions of the full thing, and he sells them to the cops at a discounted price so they can hold villains with the type of quirks that would give them a lot of trouble. I heard some of the major villain prisons even pay for them for their more dangerous inmates, except those use the bioelectric power of the prisoners to stay on permanently. He pretty much paid for his school fees himself, said Aizawa. Law enforcement loves the kid for it. Why not sell the full-sized versions? Asked Toshinori. Because they're part of his personal arsenal. He didn't want villains to get their hands on the real thing and find a way to reverse engineer it, or those more extreme groups that hate quirks to find a way to use it to permanently erase quirks off the map, said Hisashi. Normally I'd call him paranoid, but he made a pretty good argument for keeping the schematics for the eraser kitty under lock and key. With how many crazies are out there, he has a legitimate reason to be wary of them getting their hands on something that can do a wide area nullification of quirks outside the ones that are physical. Toshinori thought that one through and grimaced. He could already imagine the sort of damage Seal could have done with a device like that. Besides, the kid is already making a ton of cash from the patents and other devices he's sold to heroes, said Hisashi. That kid is a genius, and his obsession with heroes ironically made him one of the best designers in the business. If he wasn't so dead set on being a hero himself, he'd have been snatched up by the support companies in a second. Unrelated note, most of the teachers who had contact with Izuku were all too happy to join in on the possible betting pool on if he would date Endeavor's daughter. Once they had more to work on, that pool would change to when, not if. Izuku couldn't help but be struck by the fact that he had gone from the lone wolf of middle school straight to one of the most popular guys in class. It was a very weird feeling, to be honest. To add to the weirdness, the girls absolutely adored him. It drove some of the guys, Mineta Minoru in particular, crazy, because he didn't seem to notice any of them and was firmly against any perverted activities. I still can't believe how dense Midoriya is, said Mina. I mean, half of us would jump at the chance to date a guy like him, and yet he doesn't see it. Ochako nodded at that, as did Toru. Toru was now one of Izuku's biggest supporters, because he had given her a way to turn off her quirk for as long as she wanted with no side effects. Her parents couldn't stop crying for hours once they realized they could properly see her again, and that she could now become invisible whenever she wanted. Best of all, the device could be attached to a cute watch that she wore on her wrist. The device would stay powered by her natural electrical current and would remain on the underside of the watch, thus hiding it from any villains. He had earned a ton of major brownie points with the girls because he commented on how now she could find a decent guy who liked her for her before he found out how cute she was once the quirk was off. The fact he said it without trying to hit on her, and made it sound like he was commenting on the weather, was why the girls loved him. Izuku was incredibly awkward around others, seemed to find the fact they wanted to actually be friends with him without trying to mock him rather weird, and was generally a nice person. Yes, he could be a bit snarky when he was tired or in a bad mood, but he made a point to stay away from the really hurtful comments and was pretty good at helping them with homework when they were polite about asking. Ochako developed a mischievous look. Maybe he has eyes for someone else. Spill girl, said Mina seriously. Has anyone else noticed the way he looked at Todoroki-kun? Figures that the best guy in the class and he's batting for the other team, said Momo mock serious. Why is it all the best ones are taken villains or gay? Said Mina tiredly. Mystery of the universe, said Ochako. For that matter, why is it that Midoriya-kun is always so surprised we want to be nice to him without any ulterior motive? Said Momo. Because his quirk manifested rather late, so everyone thought he was quirkless and harassed him for it, said Tokoyami. I overheard the question. So the reason he's surprised we want to be actual friends with him was because his quirk came in late? Asked Momo seriously. Apparently the teachers continuously mocked him for his dream of being a hero and no one actually encouraged him. He originally planned to get promoted from the support class into the hero class, since he had an actual shot at that when All Might's secretary recognized the signs of his latent quirk, said Tokoyami. Seeing the looks he was getting, he shrugged. We share an interest in pre-quirk books and comics. He's helped me to get copies of certain books I've been wanting and we happen to talk. I'm a particular fan of a poet by the name of Edgar Allan Poe. So what happened? Asked Ochako. There was an incident where he disciplined Bakugo for attempting to use his quirk on him to teach him a lesson, only to get his butt handed to him instead. The teachers didn't like that, so they brought them both to the principal's office with their parents and threatened to suspend him. Except Izuku had video evidence of what really happened, along with similar incidents in the classroom and other popular areas like the lunchroom. He threatened to sue the school and have the press eat their reputation to shreds if they didn't back off. Apparently it scared the teachers into leaving him alone, and Bakugo ensured the other students hated him for it as well because he found a way to neutralize their quirks, said Tokoyami. From what Izuku said, they were angry because he found a way to defend himself instead of simply taking it, so he didn't have many friends in his age group. The girls all looked at each other. Izuku was a really nice guy and he had taken Mineta to task when he busted the pervert trying to peep on them in the locker room. They were all rather shocked, then darkly pleased when he walked up to Bakugo and literally paid the other teen to punt the pervert as far as he could. The farther he went, the more cash Bakugo made from the deal. Bakugo made a killing and was more than happy to do it as many times as Izuku wanted to get the point across to the perv that harassing the girls wouldn't be tolerated. It was pretty easy money for the explosive teen after all. They all silently agreed to make sure Izuku knew he had friends now and that using them was the last thing on their mind. He seemed like the kind of guy that would be a good friend to have that would support you later when you really, really needed it. There's one thing I don't get. Why are you allowed to bring so many devices and gadgets to training? Asked Ida. It's because he's technically a member of the support class, said Aizawa. Support class members are permitted to bring any hero tool or device they personally made that has been approved by the school to training and to the sports festival. After all, they need to be able to advertise their ability to create items for heroes as much as you need to showcase what you can do once you graduate. All my stuff has long been vetted by the heroes who run the support classes, since I have to wait until I graduate to get my hands on the really restricted stuff, said Izuku shrugging. That being said, my name is already out there among the support companies for the devices I've patented and sold to heroes. What sort of devices? Asked Ochako curious. Mostly the eraser kittens, which are one-time use anti-quirk restraints. It's similar to the eraser kitty I gave Toru-san so she can be seen, except these are disposable and will self-destruct once they're removed or if they're tampered with. It's paid for most of my gear since the cops have to replace them, but they like me because I give local law enforcement a discount. The permanent ones I sell to prisons are a bit more expensive. Don't forget the one device that convinced the principal to let you join the support classes to begin with, said Aizawa. Izuku ducked his head, slightly embarrassed. Seeing everyone's attention, he pulled out an oddly shaped ball that had two protrusions on the top. What's that? Asked Tsuyu. I call them all-brights. Basically, they're high-powered lights that can illuminate an area for a specific time PRD, ranging from 2 to 6 hours depending on what setting they're put on. How is that useful? Asked Tokoyami with interest. In a disaster setting, you can't really see victims or where you're going once night falls. At the highest setting, it illuminates an area like it's noon instead of night, which gives you a chance to see where you're going and what you're doing. Rescue-based heroes love them because it makes their jobs a lot easier since it lets them see things they would miss in the dark, and because it allows doctors to work without having to carry bulky generators around on the low setting, explained Izuku. They're small, easy to use and carry, and they can last for hours. However, the higher the light is set, the shorter the lifespan. He tossed a small bag of them to Tokoyami. The bird-headed teen caught them, though he gave Izuku a curious look. You once mentioned dark shadow works different due to the lighting, right? And he goes on a rampage when it's too dark, said Izuku. Tokoyami nodded. The high setting will let you regain control over him, while the low setting will make it easier for him to come out. Aren't these really expensive? Asked Tokoyami, accepting the gift with a nod of thanks. I sell them in sets of 10, and that bag only has 30 in them. Again, heroes love them because I went out of my way to make them easy to get their hands on and because I found a way to make them in bulk. Besides, it's not like I'll need them today, and if you need more let me know. I'll give you a discount, said Izuku, giving him a thumbs up. Why are they called all-brights though? Asked Kirishima. Aizawa snorted. The same reason he calls his favorite toy Eraser Kitty, said their teacher. Take a good look at what the lights resemble and you'll get the joke. As one, the class all looked at one of the all-brights Izuku had given Tokoyami. It took him a moment to move the odd light to where they could see the joke, but when they did the class became highly amused. The light was in the shape of All Might's head. Tokoyami looked at Izuku amused. The bangs control the power setting and the eyes turn it on. They're made to be disposable, said Izuku embarrassed. All Might had been incredibly amused when he found out about the devices and had no problem endorsing them once the purpose for them was explained. Got any other pro-hero-based equipment? Joked Kirishima. I have a few others. I have one based off Endeavor's explosive temper, but I can't use it or sell it because it can be made lethal. I'm also working on one based on Present Mike, but I'm still working the KNKS out of it, admitted Izuku. You are a seriously nice guy, Izuku, said Ochako. Izuku blushed at the compliment. But why do you use so many gadgets? Isn't your quirk strength-based? Asked Ojira. Izuku rolled his eyes. My quirk woke up really late because apparently it needed a certain level of physical stamina before it could be safely used. Stamina that a 4-year-old certainly wouldn't have in the first place. Everyone thought I was quirkless, so I had to find ways to work around that and even the playing field. If All Might hadn't recognized my ability for what it was, I would have gone support instead of hero. Makes sense, said Ida. It's rare, but not unheard of for a quirk to awaken late because of the fact the body isn't fully able to handle it. Imagine a 4-year-old suddenly gaining the ability to turn into a man in his late 20s with his quirk. Can you imagine the disaster that would be? Never mind the fact everyone would expect his older self to behave like an adult, the sheer amount of trauma that could be caused by shoving adult-level hormones into someone not even in school, said Izuku, causing most of the class to blanch at the example he made. At least now none of them would question why Izuku's file originally listed him as quirkless, or why his quirk resembled All Might so much. A latent quirk was rare, but not unheard of. Finally, they reached their destination at the USJ. Only 2 people present in the group had any idea of what was to come, and they weren't going to spoil the surprise. As terrifying as the incident was, the class would need the shock of being exposed to villains who wouldn't hesitate to kill them to grow and become the heroes they were destined to be. Todoroki watched Izuku's reactions carefully. Seeing his reaction to the Numu was all the confirmation she needed that Izuku was her partner and occasional lover Deku. By the time she first met him, he looked nothing like his younger self. All she had to go on was the inventions he made. The Eraser Kitty and the Albrights hadn't been made until Deku was around 25 or so, after years of testing and a lot of failures. Seeing them on a 15-year-old boy had been enough to arouse her suspicion as to who he would become. His behavior was a lot more cheerful and friendly compared to what she was used to. She had no idea how much the death of his childhood friend had weighed on his mind. Izuku stared intently at Numu with an odd expression on his face. For anyone else such an expression was highly unnerving. For Todoroki, it gave her comfort. Mostly because she knew how much Deku loathed the Numu. They were little more than mindless meat puppets made by a complete amateur who just shoved as many useful quirks into a body that managed to survive and were barely functional as a result. There wasn't any soul left in them either, that they were little more than brain-dead robots. Deku hated them because of the amount of suffering the poor victims went through. Both the Numu before they became brain-dead and the people they hurt under orders. Deku had found a way to hack the Numu in order to seize control and to set them against their handlers. After the 5th time he did it, the villains quit using them. Or it could have been that they learned the hard way not to piss off a woman fully capable of steam-boiling the creatures the second they reared their heads out of whatever hole they crawled out from. Either way, Todoroki knew of her partner's strict policy of dealing with the creatures hard and fast. Odds were he was going to create complete and utter chaos once he set the trap. These idiots didn't know what was about to hit them. It was with rather dark satisfaction watching Izuku go to work. The teachers weren't happy, and Izuku looked like he was having far too much fun to be legal, but in the end he took out almost the entire group of villains before they could do any real damage. The hand villain that she could never remember his name looked sad. Especially when Izuku decided to be a complete and utter troll by having the Numu perform what she immediately recognized as the river dance from Ireland. The meat puppet was surprisingly good at it. Aizawa, however, twitched rampantly. Midoriya, he said warningly. I know. I'm not supposed to have untested weapons out in field conditions, especially not ones like these. But this particular item is the best way I've found to deactivate those Demon Numu without anyone actually getting hurt. Unless you want to go up against a monstrosity that has high-speed regeneration, shock absorption, and was specifically designed to go toe-to-toe against All Might without any problem at all, said Izuku. Aizawa hid his cringe rather well. Does that thing work on humans? That thing isn't human. Not anymore. It's essentially brain dead, hence why I'm able to control it like a robot with the device. It wouldn't work on anything that still had the ability to resist, said Izuku flatly. The only semblance of life that creature has is that its heart and major organs are still functioning. By the time All Might and the reinforcements had shown up, nearly all of the villains were captured. Well, except the two ringleaders who hadn't hesitated to sacrifice the others to escape. The hand villain was almost certain to give him headaches later, but something told him that he was going to have a lot of fun being an absolute troll while puning that pest. Considering he kept whining about the fact that he was using cheat codes and had hacked the game against them, it was a safe bet the villain would get most of his SAO abridged references, among other things. It had been so tempting to teabag that JRK2, but he had resisted. A few days later, Nizu stared down Izuku, especially after they got the report of what his device had done to the Numu. The annoying thing was they couldn't tell the boy off, because he had very likely saved his classmates' and the teachers' lives with that stunt. "How did you know to bring that device with you to shut down that creature?" asked Nizu. "Like I would ever forget the first confirmed appearance of those half-butted abominations," scoffed Izuku. "The second I made it into one, I've been waiting for that thing to show up." "You knew the USJ was going to be attacked?" said Toshinori, unhappy. "Would you have believed a single teenager if they told you that a little over 70 villains and one abomination were going to successfully infiltrate the USJ because of one villain with a warping quirk and a man controlling a fleshy robot? Especially if they gave you a very specific date for when it was to occur, considering how lax everyone has gotten about the security around here," said Izuku flatly. After all, those villains timed their infiltration of the school very carefully so that no one would suspect they were really after All Might to kill him. Without a confirmed, direct threat against the students, you wouldn't have cancelled the class anyway. Nizu reluctantly admitted the boy was correct. It would have taken more than a vague threat for them to cancel the class with the limited time they had. They had gotten overconfident. "That still doesn't change the fact you knew it was going to happen," Nizu pointed out. "Would you believe me if I said there was a malfunction with a set of control gear I had made for my adopted daughter who had a time-based quirk that resulted in my mind being thrown back into the body of my 7-year-old self?" Seeing the way they were staring him down, he stared right back. And then he got back up from an unexpected quarter. "He's telling the truth, or at least something close to it," said Aizawa. Nizu looked at Eraserhead seriously. The man wasn't known for flights of fancy, after all. "A time-based quirk?" Nizu inquired. "You're an animal with above human-level intelligence thanks to a quirk. Is it really that hard to believe that time-based quirks exist? Especially when paired with untested and unknown technology made specifically to help the user control said quirk, only to suffer from a major malfunction," countered Izuku. "Point," conceded Nizu. When he put it like that, the story wasn't that far-fetched, just a bit hard to accept. Then again, the boy had literally been developing hero-grade support technology before he even hit PBRTY, and was well known to the companies that catered to supplying technology that made hero work a lot easier. If Izuku really did have memories of his future self, including the schematics of how to create his old hero gear, then it made a lot more sense how he was able to create the Eraser Kitty and the Albright so quickly with limited to no errors in their construction. After all, he had likely worked out the KNKS years ago before the accident. "If you're really from the future, then what sort of events have you been trying to alter?" asked Nizu seriously. Izuku's expression went flat. "I've already made one major change in my personal timeline. One of my biggest regrets, actually," he said quietly. "Kaken is alive." Dead silence. "What do you mean by that?" asked Aizawa. "In my original timeline, Bakugo suffocated to death from the slime villain because the heroes just stood there and Endeavor took his sweet time getting to the scene. By the time he killed the villain, Bakugo was already dead and no one could revive him. At the time, I had taken a different route after All Might used the fact the villain went after me first to capture him. I guess there was a hole in your pocket or something, because the villain fell out and Bakugo accidentally released him," said Izuku quietly. "This time after All Might captured the villain, I headed directly to where Bakugo would die and made sure to jump in once the heroes made it clear they were just going to do crowd control. I was pretty set about that, seeing it in person. And this time I had the means and training to deal with the situation, even if I didn't have a quirk that would help." Toshinori winced at that. Izuku hadn't known until after he started training him that All Might had been on the scene that day. However, he had already used up his time limit and was reluctant to act, thinking the other heroes would stop the villain that had gotten free by accident. Considering Izuku had vented at the heroes who allowed his friend to die the first time, he had already forgiven All Might for the incident. After all, he had no idea that the villain had been dropped by accident or that the heroes already at the scene would just stand by and watch a teenager die in front of them. And considering how bad his health was, it was understandable he would have let the others handle it. Toshinori had to ask, if only for his own curiosity. What was your hero name? Deku, the symbol of hope. The one you originally chose to inherit one for all was okay, but he didn't really inspire people as the next symbol of peace. However, once it got out that there was a quirkless hero who was not only holding his own, but was actually thriving as a hero without needing a quirk to do it well, a lot of kids started following my example because I proved you didn't need a flashy quirk to do the right thing when no one else would. The fact I made it clear I didn't care at all about promoting myself like all the other pro heroes did only made me more popular, ironically enough. I made my living by helping people and creating gear that made the other heroes' lives easier. The irony that he ended up taking over for All Might indirectly because his successor was less than impressive had not been lost on him. Izuku hadn't realized it until Sakura pointed it out to him, but the other heroes tended to look to him whenever there was a true crisis at hand. He was a natural-born leader who could inspire heroes to work together in cohesive teams on top of supplying gear and tech that would allow them to survive whatever was thrown at them. He had gained the name as the symbol of hope partially because his personality resembled All Might at his best, and because he never needed to use a quirk to get people to listen to him when the chips were down. Welcome everyone to the UA Sports Festival, said Present Mike. And joining me today as co-host is none other than Eraserhead. How did you blackmail me into this? I will get my revenge, said Aizawa irate. Present Mike smirked at him and said nothing. Down below, in the stadium, Izuku was grinning. Due to the fact he specialized in using gear and support tech, he had been granted permission to bring anything he personally made with him. In order to keep things fair, he had to leave his usual eraser kitty behind, but the principal had allowed him to have the short-range version built into his special gloves which were only effective with close contact. As in, he had to get close enough that his martial arts would actually be useful in a fight. He barely paid any real attention to the first two events. After all, his only real interest was in the one-on-one competition where he'd get a chance to really shine. Izuku decided to listen to the rather amusing commentary of Present Mike and the unfortunate Eraserhead who seemed to be playing the straight man to his friend's enthusiasm. Those two were always a hoot. Once he got up on the stage, he had to inwardly grin when he saw Todoroki on the opposite side. Had he been paying more attention, he would have seen the odd expression in her eyes. The opening act was pretty standard. Todoroki looked like she was checking his tactics out before she really got serious. Seeing the half-hearted blast of ice, Izuku lost his patience with the whole farce. He always hated the shadow Endeavor had cast on his daughter, and he would be dead if he let her suffer in silence any longer than she had to. Can I just say something? What? Said Todoroki flatly. Why are you letting that overbearing jackass with the massive inferiority complex over always coming in second to All Might dictate your life? It's your quirk, so quit holding back and show the world what you can do. Hell, last I checked you were on this stage, not him, said Izuku incensed. Step out of that shadow he's cast on you and actually live your life. Dead silence, as shock seemed to ripple through the crowd. Endeavor was beyond said, because anyone with half a brain cell could figure out who Izuku meant. He did not appreciate having a mere brat claim that he had an inferiority complex for the fact All Might kept beating him for the top hero spot. All Might was exasperated, but felt like Izuku was trying to help his classmates so would withhold judgment for the moment at his comment. He did not expect young Todoroki's reaction. Neither did anyone else. Todoroki openly smirked, and there was a strange fondness in her expression as she replied back. Deku, for the future symbol of hope you talk way too DMN much. Now are you going to get off your butt and actually fight me properly, or do I have to steam boil you into taking me seriously? She replied in perfect English, with an odd New York accent for some reason. The stunned shock on his face was priceless, before a wide grin crossed his face. That depends. Steam Queen, are you going to show that a-hole who's the real top dog, or are you going to keep hiding your brilliance from the world? He shot back in perfect Italian. The blast of steam that nearly broiled him alive shocked the audience into disbelief. Izuku didn't seem shocked in the least, that he was openly cackling with delight. Now that's more like it. Come and get me if you can, Steam Queen. If you insist, she called back. Present Mike and Eraserhead were in absolute shock before they caught up with what was going on. Holy shit, is he running up ice and fighting her midair? Said Present Mike. They've been holding back on us, said Eraserhead, also stunned. Everyone knew Todoroki had a fire and ice quirk. However, the girl had apparently drawn upon a rare show of brilliance to come up with a way to combine them into making steam. Her fire would shoot across her ice half so fast that it melted the ice and made the resulting water superheated at the same time, creating a very humid fog that obscured their view occasionally. Izuku had thrown out all pretenses of holding back one for all, and All Might was among those cheering as the boy displayed a surprising ability to use more than the 7% that he originally estimated. He could tell that Izuku wasn't even thinking about how he was supposed to use the quirk All Might had transferred to him, that he was letting pure instinct regulate his quirk for him as he focused on not getting killed by Sakura's quirk. Toshinori could already hear the business kids excitedly talking about promoting the next All Might, as before this point Izuku had kept himself very low-key. Clearly he had been saving energy for this stage, because he not only demonstrated his gear, but also his quirk. And he was enjoying himself. All Might wondered if Endeavor noticed the way his daughter was playing with his apprentice. It was clear there was a lot of attraction going on between them, and he knew for a fact there was already a betting pool on if and when the two got together. Finally, the rather epic fight between the two ended, with Izuku standing on a massive glacier of ice and making an absolutely ridiculous pose spouting something about an underdog. It sounded vaguely familiar, that likely something from a pre-quirk era, because he knew Izuku had a lot of things. From the slight annoyance on Sakura's face, and there was no mistaking her gender considering the top half of her shirt got ripped to expose her camisole and still developing chest. She knew exactly what he was quoting and wasn't impressed by it. The startled yelp as ice crept up Izuku's pants, and freezing his boxers, if Toshinori wasn't mistaken, was swiftly followed by Izuku's loud declaration of, "I regret nothing." Todoroki would pass on to the next round, but anyone with half a brain could tell that this fight was likely to be the most talked about of the festival. It was like seeing two greats clash in a play fight and enjoying the hell out of it in the process. Aizawa looked at his friend with dark amusement. For the record, you and everyone else in the betting pool now owe me. That's not fair. Why couldn't they have waited until summer break to pull something like this off? Said Present Mike, before he realized his mistake and the fact they were still very much live. Izuku, who had been listening now that he had lost the fight, only to win a war for Sakura's heart, started howling as Aizawa-sensei darkly reminded each teacher that he knew where they lived and that he would hunt them down if they tried to renege on their bets. Totally worth the butt-kicking and frozen ball. Sakura immediately went to find him in the infirmary once she was done flash-freezing Bakugo, thus winning the tournament for the first-year division. "You took too long," she commented irritably. "To be fair, I had no idea you were sent back as well, and I didn't want to scare you off. Do you not remember all the hoops you had me jump through when we first started dating last time to PS us off your dad?" said Izuku. "Fair enough," she replied. "Just so we're clear, I'm not sharing." "Wouldn't dream of it," said Izuku. You couldn't sandblast the smile on his face. He had his girl back. Now they just needed their daughter, and their mismatched family would be complete again. "I can't believe you were a girl this whole time. Why didn't you wear the girl's uniform?" said Momo. "Because Endeavor isn't but and he didn't want any unworthy boys getting an interest in me and weakening his precious bloodline," spat Sakura. "The second I graduate, I'm moving to New York and becoming a fashion designer. I refuse to live in his shadow." "Oh, what kind of fashion?" asked Mina eagerly. Sakura reached into her bag and pulled out a book. The girls took one look at it and started squealing. "Oh my gosh, these are totally cute," said Toru. "These look like they could double as hero wear," said Momo thoughtfully. "My policy is functional, fashionable, and flattering. Just look at how the support companies made our hero costumes," said Sakura, annoyed. I know, right? Said Momo. Yeah, between Sakura's designs and my gear, we could corner the market on hero wear and support tech, said Izuku grinning. Your real name is Sakura? Said Ochako. Yes, she replied tersely. While the girls were oohing and awing about the designs and were discussing who would look best in them and if Sakura would mind having a few models, for when she went big, Sakura sat next to Izuku who was mostly just tired. All we're missing is baby Eri, said Izuku quietly. We'll find her. If we were sent back, then I have no doubt she was at the source of the blast after all, said Sakura quietly. Hell, she was the source, said Izuku. He had adopted her because no one else could safely handle her quirk, and being a temperamental teenager hadn't helped in the least. She kept having accidents, and it had taken him months to finish the original Eraser Kitty so she could be hugged without fear of accidentally killing someone with her quirk. The first time she realized her ability to rewind time in living things wasn't working, and that she could hug someone while emotional without hurting them, she had bawled her eyes out. The fact Izuku never treated her like she was some terrifying thing had helped a lot too. She couldn't stop crying tears of joy when he showed her the adoption papers to make her his daughter officially. That had been a full year before Sakura returned to Japan, having spent most of her life after graduating UA as a fashion designer and avoiding Endeavor. She only came back because of his retirement and sudden illness, having made her own name without having to deal with his shadow hovering over her. She met Deku through her work in making the outfits Hero, where he had become the top designer of Hero Tech, and they had collaborated on a special project for a show and they had hit it off. Sakura originally slept with Deku to PSS off Endeavor. She never thought she would have fallen for him in the process. She was very close to making their partnership an official one when the blast happened. So that you and Endeavor's daughter? Said All Might. He had a look of a parent prepared to tease their kids about their love life. Considering the hero had become the closest thing to a father he ever had, it wasn't that difficult a comparison. Inko was delighted to meet Sakura and to learn her son had such a cute girlfriend. One that had a high chance of progressing into a wife, if the looks they kept sharing were any indication. Remember how I said I was caught up in a blast that sent me back to my younger self? Apparently she was caught up in it as well. Though she was slightly annoyed with me because I took so long to try and contact her younger self, said Izuku amused. What was that about an underdog though? Asked All Might. That still confused him. It's a pre-quirk series about a dog that gains superpowers that a lot like multiple quirks actually that fights crime. It talks, flies and goes by the name of Underdog. Sakura was just annoyed I quoted his catchphrase and that I corrupted my daughter with my love of pre-quirk movies and series, said Izuku unashamed. He was a dork and a classic buff, and DMN proud of it. He always found it amusing to see the exasperated look on Sakura's face when he quoted his old shows. Like standing on a glacier in an audience of thousands and proclaiming, "There's no need to fear, Underdog is here." Like he said before she froze his boxers in retaliation that he regretted nothing. Well, Endeavor is said at the fact that Sakura made it clear she's dating you and DMN what he has to say about it. So I'd watch out for him, said All Might. Not surprising that he was said the first time we got together, said Izuku shrugging. Sakura had only slept with him that first time to PSS her dad off. So the fact he was furious she was dating All Might's apprentice was entirely unsurprising. By the way, Nizu wanted to speak to you too, said All Might. Probably about the upgrades I promised him before the festival. As it turned out, that was part of it. He also wanted to make sure he hadn't misread the paperwork regarding Sakura's living expenses. Endeavor had been so furious about her new boyfriend that he had cut her off, which meant she had to pay for her dorm fees or be forced to move back home. Except Izuku was already making enough money that he could easily pay for her living expenses and had already moved his mother to a better house years ago. His tech was now their main source of income. Unsurprisingly, Sakura's mother and older sister were silently cheering her on from the sidelines. Not only was she standing up to the brute known as Endeavor, but she was showing the world she was her own person and not an extension of him. It wasn't like she was born out of a loving marriage after all. Endeavor had forced her mother to marry him so that he could have her quirk in his bloodline and so he could train any children that were able to successfully handle both fire and ice quirks. It was unfortunate that Sakura didn't remember her future self before the incident with the boiling water, but you couldn't have everything. Though this did give Izuku a chance to discuss something with Nizu. If Sakura had been sent back, after only being clipped by the blast, then it meant Eri had almost certainly come with them. And in this time she would be suffering under her so-called father, who was using her to create the anti-quirk drag. Which was why Izuku wanted to find his daughter and give her an actual childhood this time around. Considering the nature of her quirk, and the fact that she was the reason they were sent to the past in the first place due to a device malfunction, Nizu was willing to humor the teen. Mostly because the limited description Izuku gave of Eri's childhood and what little he knew about what the villains were using her for. Crimson eyes stared eagerly at the screen. It looked like her gamble had paid off. Her parents had been sent back to their younger selves and had already begun to change things. She could see what her daddy meant when he mentioned Uncle Kakin had an explosive temper with a quirk to match. As painful as the needles were, they were nothing compared to being separated from her real daddy. Daddy was probably happy he found mommy again and from the looks of the video, had managed to obtain one for all from All Might instead of that rather boring guy her daddy wasn't very impressed with. She knew her parents would be coming for her, and then they could be a proper family again. Eri was patient. She could wait for her daddy to come close enough for her to find. She had learned a lot from him, since he was always happy to teach her how to escape and cause mischief for villains. It helped to deal with the nightmares of this place. Besides, she really wanted to meet daddy's idol before the end. Even after his death, her daddy didn't stop revering All Might and using him as the inspiration for his hero work. She always found it funny that the man who inherited All Might's power once mentioned to her daddy that he should have been the one to inherit whatever power All Might had given him. He was far more deserving of it, and he inspired the people the way All Might had when he first came onto the scene as a hero. Her daddy Deku ended up carrying that torch without even trying. It made her incredibly proud to be the symbol of Hope's daughter. With the revelation of Sakura's actual gender and confirmation she was dating Izuku, things seemed to settle down in the class. Sakura opened up a bit more with her classmates, often getting pulled into intense discussions with the girls over fashion. After seeing some of the costumes she came up with, combined with the gear Izuku could create once he had the right clearance to buy what he needed, a lot of their classmates were rather eager to see what they could do upon graduation. Aizawa had taken one look at what they could do, and had already slated them to be the next major power couple. Not only were they powerful heroes in their own right, but they had the ability to inspire countless generations as well as leave behind a legacy that would have them remembered for a long, long time. So your hero name is going to be Steam Queen? That's so cool, said Mina. It's actually short for Steampunk Queen, said Sakura. What started out as a joke became her official hero title. It was a play on the fact she was able to make steam with her two quirks and was into fashion. Deku had coined it while they were collaborating for a fashion show that was geared for heroes, and the nickname had stuck. He called her the Steampunk Queen because of the style that was quite popular among a certain niche. After Sakura looked it up to find out what he was talking about, she ended up incorporating it into her designs, which made her even more popular. Her label was a snowflake that happened to look like a gear. It became an instant hit once it was introduced. "What about you, Midoriya?" asked Ida. He was still angry, but he wasn't filled with revenge. Most of that was due to Izuku immediately confronting him when he heard the news and offering to make a support gear for free that would allow his older brother to walk again. Ingenium would have to retire, as his quirk was badly damaged, never mind the trauma inflicted by the experience, but he would be able to move under his own power. Which was more than the doctors had offered when Ida learned the news of the attack on his brother. He was starting to get why Sakura called him the symbol of hope, even if most of their class didn't understand what she said due to it being in English. He had to wonder at the accent though no one really caught what Izuku said in reply, except those who spoke Italian. "I've been meaning to ask you what was that underdog thing you mentioned before Todoroki-chan beat you?" asked Ochako. Sakura rolled her eyes at Izuku. "This dork thinks it's funny to use catchphrases from pre-quirk series when he's fighting," said Sakura exasperated. Bakugo stared at her. "Oh gods, he's done it to you too?" he complained. I swear Deku has to be the biggest freaking nerd on the planet. He's got boxes of that pre-quirk sheet and he's always quoting it. Seeing the others' confusion, Sakura elaborated, to the amusement of Izuku. Underdog is from a pre-quirk series. It's basically a series about a dog who gains powers and fights crime. It can talk and fly, among other things, and Izuku pretty much used his catchphrase when he shows up to save the day. Most of their classmates looked amused at that, while Izuku felt just smug. The principal thought it was pretty demon funny when he heard it, commented Izuku. Apparently Nizu is a major fan, and he cracked up when I used the quote. Unsurprising, considering he's an animal with a quirk, said Sakura dryly. Though I think the audience was laughing harder at the way the teachers slipped up and revealed there was a betting pool about us. Izuku straight up cackled. Aizawa-sensei looked so smug and the audience was cracking up, said Izuku amused. I know I overheard a few heroes talking about us being the next power couple. They were. Endeavor was super sad at the idea of me dating All Might's protege, said Sakura smugly. Izuku was the only one who saw the text about meeting her mother and older sister. Which was fair that she had already met his mom and they had hit it off instantly. But still, isn't Izuku-kun a bit too perfect as a boyfriend? Asked Ochako. Sakura snorted at that. If by perfect you mean he knows how to feed himself beyond microwavable meals, then yes he fits that definition, said Sakura. I sense hilarious blackmail, said Momo. He can't cook. At all. He keeps getting distracted at the worst times and the best he can do is boil water to make instant ramen, said Sakura. His mother was all too happy to share horror stories about his cooking. I'm not that bad, said Izuku blushing. Dude, you keep trying to experiment with your food. Who the F puts wasabi on chocolate ice cream and actually is it? Said Bakugo. Seeing the grossed out faces of the classmates, Izuku pouted. And you keep getting distracted whenever your mom tried to teach you. Frankly, I'm amazed you can even boil water without ruining the pan, said Sakura flatly. Come on, said Izuku pouting, which caused the class to laugh. And don't forget the amount of spazzing out he does when he runs across a quirk he's never seen before, said Bakugo. Don't remind me. He'd probably stand in the middle of a big fight against a new villain to write up notes about their quirk, the pros and cons and possible training ideas, said Sakura exasperated. What is this? Pick on Izuku Day? No, this is Roast Izuku Day, said Sakura without missing a beat. The others haven't had time to pick up on your downsides just yet, like the fact you're an absolute dork at times. I'm not just a dork, I'm a super dork. I refuse to be mediocre when it comes to being a nerd, said Izuku, puffing up his chest proudly. That set the class off again. So which pro heroes did you pick to job shadow? Asked Ochako eagerly. A ton of heroes wanted Sakura, Bakugo and Izuku, for obvious reasons. Izuku normally wouldn't have had any considering he had mostly coasted through the sports festival with his gear that except the fight with Sakura had made the pro heroes at the festival take intense interest in him. All Might suggested someone, so I'm going to give them a try first, said Izuku. It hadn't taken much for him to agree to the idea, once he recognized the name. Who was he to say no to the hero who trained All Might? I'm going to shadow someone from a support company, said Sakura. She never really got to see the work that went into creating her designs, so this would be an interesting experience. And it never hurt to start making friends early in the industry considering she would be relying on them to make the costumes for her clients later. Besides, it had nothing to do with Endeavor and it kept her far, far away from her overbearing father. Her mother and older sister were all too happy to encourage her dreams, especially if it snubbed Endeavor's demands on her. It wasn't like he married his wife for love after all, and he was a horrible father figure to his children. The sooner she was able to cut ties with him, the happier and better off she would be. Bakugo felt he had been fairly patient with Izuku's oddities over the years that like the fact he suddenly developed one hell of a spine when he was 7. But the weird way he and Todoroki acted around each other made him very suspicious. Todoroki was partially out of his reach because she had already left for her job shadowing. Izuku was another story and far more likely to give him a straight answer. Bakugo wasn't oblivious to the way Izuku sometimes looked at him. Alright Deku, what the f is going on between you and Todoroki? She acts way too familiar with you to be normal, demanded Bakugo. What do you mean? I mean she acts like she's known you for years and I've never seen her before we entered UA. And the way you two fought was more like a couple of pro heroes having a play fight than anything serious. Izuku thought about what to say before he sighed. Would you believe if I said that we got caught up in a blast involving a quirk that rewinds time in living matter? I call bullshit, said Bakugo. I'm dead serious. I was developing some gear for a girl I adopted that had a rare time-based quirk, and for some reason it malfunctioned. Next thing I knew, I was in my 7-year-old self wondering what the hell happened, shrugged Izuku. Prove it, said Bakugo. He wasn't dismissing the idea, but he was pretty skeptical. Izuku looked him dead in the eye. Remember the sludge villain? In my original timeline, you died from suffocation and Endeavor only showed up after you died because the heroes stood there and watched. I didn't develop the device that saved you until over a decade after you died, and I was in the general studies course at UA until I managed to get into the support class. The rest you could say is history, said Izuku, dead serious. And Todoroki? Demanded Bakugo. We collaborated on a hero-only fashion show that she did the costumes and I made the gear. We ended up together because it really set off her father. She was sleeping with a quirkless support-based hero who resembled All Might too much. And she found she liked working with me, so we ended up being partners, said Izuku. What's the girl's name? The one you adopted? Asked Bakugo. Eri. Her name is Eri. She should be 5 now, and if I remember her timeline, she's still trapped with the villains who were using her blood to make an anti-quirk drag, said Izuku. Actually, now that I think back on it, it might not have been an accident at all. What do you mean? Eri's quirk is known as Rewind. It allows her to reverse time in living things like trees and people. The gear I was developing was to help her control that power, and I might have gotten drunk a few times and said too much in her hearing, said Izuku. I wouldn't put it past Eri to find a way to overload the gear and send us into the past as a way to make me happy. How would that make you happy? Said Bakugo, incredulous. As ridiculous as Izuku's story sounded, it made a hell of a lot more sense in explaining where he suddenly got the ideas for his gear or why he went from a complete loner to having a girlfriend who by all rights shouldn't be as cozy as she was with him. One of my biggest regrets is that I didn't develop my hero gear that could have saved your life until over 10 years after your death. Eri has heard me talk about how much I wished you had lived so that you could see how far I made it without a fancy quirk. While you can be an arrogant but, you were my closest childhood friend and it always set me off that the heroes stood by and did nothing to save you, said Izuku. Bakugo wanted to deny it, except if Izuku hadn't done something he knew full well he would have died. The time travel bit was a little out there, but it did explain the way his behavior changed out of the blue. Are you mad? Asked Izuku. Any other big secrets you're hiding? Technically it's not my secret. And I would tell you, but the one it would hurt the most asked me to keep quiet, said Izuku. This have anything to do with why you're suddenly so chummy with All Might and have a quirk? Asked Bakugo seriously. Yes. Not my problem so long as it won't bite you in the butt later, said Bakugo firmly. Though you do realize you now owe me gear for life. You agree to stress test it for me so that can survive field work with people who wouldn't bother to care for them or against villains that would do a lot more damage than normal, and you have a deal, deadpanned Izuku. Seriously, do you have any idea how useful your quirk is in testing gear that's meant for heavy use? On the plus side, he was able to mend his friendship with his oldest friend. Bakugo was an but he was a loyal friend and hid his real nature behind his explosive temper. By the way, you do realize the first thing I'm going to do once I get Eri back is introduce her to her Uncle Bakugo, right? Said Izuku smirking. He was rewarded with Bakugo flushing with embarrassment. Shut up, dumbass. Izuku cackled. Bakugo tackled him with intent on giving him a black eye. Look on the bright side. If things keep going as they have, then there's a high chance you can watch me kick Endeavors, but when he tries to scare me off Sakura, said Izuku. The F are you talking about? Endeavor is a quirkist and he really hates All Might. He's been pressuring Sakura for years now and she loathes him. So he'll take offense at the idea of her dating All Might's apprentice and try to hide the potential, but kicking he'll want to give me as a show of force into making me leave as a training session, explained Izuku. Hell, the entire reason Sakura went into fashion in the first place was to get as far away from him as possible and get into a career that he had zero influence on. Bakugo stared at him. How the hell are you so calm about this? Because I kicked his butt when I was a pro hero without a quirk, and that was before I found a way to fight with my eraser kitty. I've got a lot more experience now, and Sakura was all too happy to get me used to fighting against someone with a fire quirk to ensure her genetic donor didn't chase me off, said Izuku cheerfully. Add in my new quirk and I'm going to pound his face into the training room floor for sheets and giggles. You either let me watch that sheet or I will personally kick your butt, said Bakugo seriously. Can do, chirped Izuku. There's no need to fear. But because I, all bunny, am here. You are a complete dork, you know that right? Said Sakura with fond exasperation. Her mother and older sister giggled from the bed. When Sakura said she wanted to introduce her boyfriend, they hadn't known what to expect. This goofy, fun-loving and warm boy with green hair, wearing rabbit ears that looked like All Might's bangs, and gentle smile was a far cry from the cold-hearted and cruel Endeavor. There was no little sense of relief in her eyes looking at the young man her daughter had fallen for. He was nothing like her husband, and the love and fondness whenever he looked at her daughter was something that made her happy. Sakura at least would not share her fate. Sakura took great solace in the fact her mother and sister adored Izuku. Her mother Rei smiled at her daughters. I'm happy for you, Sakura, she said quietly. Izuku offered to let me borrow his body cam for when that man tries to chase him off. I'm sure you'll enjoy it as much as I will, said Sakura darkly. What are you talking about? Asked Fuyumi, her sister. Sakura's eyes turned wicked with feminine wrath. Izuku here happens to have something that will disable Endeavor's quirk and has plenty of training fighting without it. That hot-headed bastard won't stand a chance once his flames are forcibly turned off. I don't tolerate people who abuse their family and treat their children like extensions of their overblown ego, said Izuku brightly. Sakura blushed at the warm hug he gave her. Her mother and older sister smiled at the way the two interacted. A little while later, what did you give my sister? A better camera to stalk us with on our date this Saturday. Date? Said Sakura staring at him. Izuku grinned and held up two tickets to a new theme park on the beach. All Might may or may not have given me a pair of tickets after I mentioned giving your sister a better camera to take pictures with, though I didn't know what we were going to do for our first official date. But what's the catch? It was part of the perks that came from authorizing an All Might-themed park, said Izuku without any shame. He got them from the park manager and said it was part of my payment for interning at his hero office and helping with the paperwork. Sakura thought how Endeavor would react to his daughter having her first date at an All Might theme park. I'm in, she said wickedly. The only thing that would make it better would be if Eri was with us. Once we find her and get things settled down, we'll take her, promised Izuku. Ah yes, how could I ever forget the adventures of All Bunny, the symbol of justice who always hops into danger to protect the innocent, said Sakura. I think Mom liked you. She had seen the open relief and amusement her mother had watching Izuku's antics. Even her sister found it highly amusing, but what she hadn't noticed was the way they observed her as well. It was pretty clear to see how fond Sakura was of Izuku, and how his behavior made her happier than she ever was around Endeavor. A few days later, Sakura's lips twitched upwards when she saw the theme park. All Might had given them VIP passes, and Izuku made sure to come armed with extra cash. He also gave Fuyumi a decent camera, since he had noticed her discreetly hanging back. You do realize my older sister is following us, commented Sakura. I know. I gave her a decent camera and made sure she had enough cash to pay for some food and a few of the games, said Izuku with a straight face. That and a promise she'll share the pictures with Mom. Sakura snorted at that. The two of them rather enjoyed their date. Izuku found it highly amusing when he busted Toshinori following them with Fuyumi once or twice. Hey, check it out, there's a feed on our date, said Izuku wickedly. Really? Oh wow, that's really going to piss him off, said Sakura darkly amused. The feed was from a reporter who happened to recognize Sakura and spotted them on their date. She was getting pictures with her head in the hole of the All Might cut out with her in the spot where All Might's head would be. Oh man, is he going to be sad seeing that, said Izuku with glee. Tell me about it. Makes me glad I moved to the dorms before he knew what I was planning, said Sakura. Now that she wasn't hiding anymore, she spoke up about Endeavor's behavior. As a result, his parental rights were forcibly terminated and her older sister was her legal guardian now. Needless to say, Endeavor was royally said, but her older siblings had spoken up and confirmed most of what she said to the principal. He was also banned from going near his daughter. The only way to describe his mood when he saw the newsfeed from one of his sidekicks was apocalyptic. He was beyond sad. Izuku was running an errand for All Might. He had overdone it with his quirk and needed his intern to deliver some papers to the police station. While he delivered the papers, he happened to notice a little boy looking really skittish all by herself. The scene reminded him so much of Eri when she first moved into his home that he couldn't help what he did next. "Hey there, little man. What you doing here all by yourself?" asked Izuku, with his tone the same one he would use on Eri when she had a nightmare. He kept his friendly smile up even as he heard the limited information the little boy gave him. Apparently his dad was being as abusive as that asshat Endeavor, but the cops couldn't prove it without the kid's statement. But the boy was too scared to say anything. Well, he knew exactly how to fix that. Izuku reached into his bag and grinned at the kid. "Hey, you know about All Might, the symbol of peace, right?" "Who doesn't?" said the boy, perking up. "Close your eyes for a second," said Izuku. The boy did so. Izuku put something on. "Ready? Open your eyes." The boy did as instructed, and stared at the older boy in front of him. "I am All Bunny, the symbol of justice. I hop into action whenever there is foul deeds that need to be stopped," said Izuku, doing an absolutely ridiculous pose wearing a rabbit-eared headband that bore a strong resemblance to All Might's bangs. The boy stared, mouth agape before he stared to giggle madly. Izuku's cheerful nature made the kid relax, enough so that the police were able to get a statement. The kid was sent to live with his aunt until the investigation was done. "You've got a real talent there, kid," said Tsukachi. "I've got a knack with kids. My All Bunny routine never fails to get them to smile," said Izuku proudly. "It certainly got me to smile." "How effective is this routine on skittish kids?" asked Tsukachi, an idea coming to mind. "Very. Why? I have 2 open cases that are about to go to court involving kids under 12. The kids are a little scared to testify against 2 known villains that did a lot of damage. One of them was present during an attack that killed his father. You want me to see if I can distract them from being afraid in court so they can testify, right?" asked Izuku. "Think you can do it?" "Yeah. Just tell me when and where and I'll do my best to cheer them up so that they can testify. Oh, and we might want to record what we're doing so the defense can't say I coached the children in what to say in their testimony," said Izuku. Tsukachi was glad Izuku brought it up. He never would have considered that. A few days later, "I am All Bunny, hopping into action for justice," said Izuku cheerfully. He had the rabbit ears on as well as a big fluffy tail and a costume that resembled one of the earlier outfits All Might wore. The 10-year-old girl giggled madly, and her mother looked just as amused. "I know you're scared to go in there and talk in front of all those adults. But I want you to remember something. When you start to feel afraid, I want you to look behind the prosecution's table. You'll see me sitting there with these ears on, okay?" said Izuku gently. "You'll be in there with me?" she said. Izuku handed her a small rabbit plushie he had made that had the All Bunny ears. "This is a good luck charm. You can hold on to this when you go up there and keep it after," said Izuku. The little girl cheered right up. "Thank you, Mr. All Bunny," she said. "Ready to go in?" asked Izuku. She nodded brightly. "Thank you for that." She was really terrified of going up there, said her mother. "I find being an absolute dork in front of kids helps them overcome their temporary fear," said Izuku smiling. "Besides, even I admit that All Might's bangs look like rabbit ears and I'm one of his biggest fans." A few hours later, All Might met up with Izuku to see how he was doing. "How was court?" "It wasn't too bad. I cheered her up so that she wasn't scared of being up there with all those adults watching," said Izuku cheerfully. "So what's this I hear about All Bunny, the symbol of justice?" asked All Might amused. "You saw the video, didn't you?" "Tsukachi was thoughtful enough to forward a copy to me," he admitted. "It's something I came up for Eri. She used to have horrible nightmares, and you were no longer around. So I decided to come up with All Bunny as a way to distract her from the bad memories. Kids seem to love it, said Izuku shrugging. Well, you definitely got the personality down pat, said Toshinori. I'm your biggest fan. Do you really think I would do your image a disservice, especially when I'm using it to cheer kids up, said Izuku incredulous. Of course, the whole routine is the main reason Sakura started calling me the biggest dork she had ever met. Not that he was complaining. She fell for him because he was a complete dork. How would you like to make All Bunny an official thing? Asked Toshinori. What do you mean? Since you're using my image, even if it is in rabbit form, I could easily endorse it and make it a legitimate part of my image. Meaning you'd get actual money for its use on top of the percentage sent to me, said Toshinori. Actually, he found the All Bunny symbol of justice rather flattering, considering some of the All Might parodies he had come across over the years. Not only that, but Izuku's main purpose was to cheer children up, which he could always get behind. Are you serious? Asked Izuku curious. Absolutely. What exactly do you do for this routine anyway? It's generally me wearing the rabbit headband and tail along with a copy of an older hero costume doing an over-the-top routine of being a pro hero with the kids participating. I based it off the old Sentai routines from before quirks became a thing. Toshinori blinked. You mean like those old Power Ranger routines? He asked. However, I do hand so the All Bunny plushies I hand the kids. Watching Izuku's All Bunny routine while they were at the police station, Toshinori knew he could easily endorse this sort of thing. Let me get this straight, you did the All Bunny routine at the police station and now All Might is officially endorsing it as a real thing and the cops want you to help whenever they need a kid to testify? Said Sakura. Like I could pass that poor kid in the station and not cheer him up, said Izuku. Point, said Sakura. Still, this is going to be a big thing for you, considering it might help Eri find us. Eri will always be able to find me. She's my baby after all, said Izuku. But it would be nice to see All Bunny as a legitimate thing. Sakura would merely shake her head when said girl managed to track Izuku down. By herself. A little later, after causing an untold amount of havoc and chaos in the base she was being held captive in. Alright, try standing up now, said Izuku, as he was calibrating the device that would help Ida's brother walk again. Tensei carefully put a foot down. When the doctors said he'd never walk, much less be a pro hero again, he had been devastated. And then his little brother's classmate showed up to get some measurements and gave him a promise that would at least be mobile on his own power before the end of the year, free of charge. He had been dubious right until he discovered he had actual feeling in his left foot again. Tenya had been beside himself after he was able to move his left leg. So how does this work again? Asked Tensei, trying to distract himself. Have you ever heard of Nanoman? Asked Izuku. Not particularly. He's a quirkless hero who was forced to retire because the QRA found out he lied, despite the fact he was actually rather successful. However, it didn't stop him from developing his tools even further and progressing the research on nanomachine technology. Thanks to a collaboration effort with him, and the fact he was fascinated at the idea of what it could mean for the medical industry, we were able to develop a prototype that basically uses the remaining bone in your legs that were ruined as the material for the nanomachines to rebuild the structure of your legs. However, it's still a prototype. At least that's what everyone would assume. Izuku had developed this after he had become good friends with the ingenium of his time, who happened to be his classmate now. He had been rather drunk on the anniversary of the hero killer's attack on his brother and asked Izuku if there was a way to help him. It took a lot of trial and error, but he eventually developed a prototype set of nanomachines, with the help of a retired hero who was fascinated by the idea, that would essentially eat the bones that had been broken and use it as the material that would rebuild the legs from where the break stopped. It was groundbreaking research. One that led to a number of injuries that were previously untreatable to be fixed. Several of the older heroes who took trauma to the head and lost the majority of their eyesight and had to retire were shocked to find they could suddenly see again. Then what's the brace for? Same scenario as a broken leg, that the machines will need time to work in order to rebuild the shattered bone, but in order to do so they need to be stabilized first. If you try to walk on a broken leg without a cast, you could easily cause it to heal wrong. This is to ensure that the bone regrows the way it should. said Izuku absently. Makes sense. What about my quirk? Izuku looked him in the eye. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the point where we could heal quirks. A bone is easy. We already have the roadmap built over countless centuries to how it's supposed to work and function. We just needed to program the machines to follow that map. A quirk is too recent and too varied for them to reliably work. Tensei sagged. At least he would be able to walk again. There's also the fact that since this is new technology, there's no way to determine how strong or solid the bone will be. And you know how dangerous villains can be. One wrong hit and you would be permanently disabled. Thanks for giving me a straight answer. I prefer to give my clients a realistic knowledge of how my tech works. Even if all I did here was create the brace and help adjust the programming of another hero's work, said Izuku. Sometimes life throws us major curveball that cause us to find a new direction. The only thing we can do is get on our feet and keep moving forward. You're a lot wiser than most think, said Tensei. Besides, this gives you a chance to show off your new scars and hopefully get a wife. There's no greater trial than fatherhood, said Izuku cheerfully. He had learned that the hard way with Eri, not that he was complaining. Izuku finished adjusting the brace. Okay, now we just need to let the machines do their work, so no trying to get up for at least 2 days. Next time you see me, we can check to see the progress of the machines and the brace. With any luck you'll be walking in a month or 2, thanks to physical therapy. Ito was beside himself with tears when he watched his elder brother slowly start on the long road to recovery. He would become a lifelong friend of Izuku's as a result. On an unrelated note, his brother followed Izuku's advice and started dating a nice girl that he later married. Great that I still can't get the calibration down, and without the right clearance level the materials I need to even make this are out of reach, said Izuku tiredly. It was a pet project of his that he got a lot of really fun ideas from different series, and one of them happened to be a favorite of his. Or at least the weapons anyway. He was trying to recreate the wire-based weapon used by the character who shared his hair color, even if he didn't share the man's perverted attitude. He had managed to recreate it in his original timeline, that even if there was an incident which resulted in his name losing favor among the public. Lubbock's weapon was impressive, but a complete pain in the butt to recreate. And as if he didn't have enough headaches, Endeavor had sent a request for him to join in on one of Sakura's training sessions. And the wording alone made it clear it wasn't a request, but a demand. He was already said his daughter was dating All Might's apprentice. He would never support her goal of becoming a hero-based fashion designer, or that she fully intended to marry someone who would likely be the second coming of his hated rival. Well, at least he would get some amusement from the overdue ass-kicking of that blowhard. 2 days later, Endeavor sneered at the boy who dared to date his daughter and greatest work. He barely noted the explosive teen present. Being humiliated with a peer watching was sure to hammer in the fact he wasn't worthy of his daughter. He didn't really register the fact his daughter and the other teen were holding up cameras right up until the moment his quirk suddenly stopped working. The green-haired fool looked entirely too smug at his shocked expression. Now, I believe there is a matter of the amount of grief you've given your family over the years that needs to be settled? Endeavor sneered at the boy. He was a mere child compared to him. The moment he said begin, all hell broke loose. Izuku touched something under his shirt, and without any warning his quirk suddenly stopped working. Bakugo was already sneering at the ass-kicking the number 2 hero got from his best friend. Izuku may not look it, but he was a powerhouse who knew martial arts. His body was compact, rather than bulky, which meant people tended to underestimate him in a fight since he preferred to use his gadgets rather than his actual strength. Sakura was rather glad her boyfriend had given her a high-quality video recorder for this moment, because honestly, she wanted to replay it over and over as many times as possible, and she knew her mother and older sister would want to rewatch this scene as well. Because there was absolutely nothing that could top Endeavor getting his butt pawned by a kid half his size and age without using any quirk or device other than the eraser kitty. And when they took that out of the equation, Izuku hadn't hesitated for a second to kick Endeavor so hard in the ball while using one for all that she would swear one of them burst. The overbearing jackass was sent flying and far away from the home. "Have I ever said how much I love you?" said Sakura. "Not since the last time I kicked his butt." She kissed him hard. If it wasn't for Fuyumi walking in, she would have gone into a major makeout session with him. On an unrelated note, Endeavor had to take a leave of absence for an unspecified training injury that he refused to disclose. Sakura was just glad she now had viable blackmail on her father that she could use to get him to back the hell off. Unless he wanted the fact he got his butt handed to him by a 15-year-old who happened to be All Might's apprentice made very public. Thank the gods that we did combat practice damn near every day, otherwise handling my quirk would have been a total pain. Izuku never had a quirk before, and to be honest, Sakura always enjoyed their mock fighting. Having to deal with the added factor of a quirk Izuku was still working the KNKS out of had given it an added factor of fun. Izuku didn't feel bitter about being quirkless. He had actually felt smug once he finally got the eraser kitty working, because he could kick the butt of the high and mighty down to size. After all, he wasn't affected by the device while they suddenly had to deal with the fact they lost the one thing that made them feel superior to others. But now he could proudly say he was inheriting All Might's legacy. "I can't believe you managed to get my mom out of the hospital," said Sakura. To be fair, the doctors had already noticed something was off about her diagnosis, but they couldn't do anything because of that jackass. The main reason they couldn't release her was because the only place she had to go back to was that house, which would be impossible considering he caused this mess in the first place. "Fortunately, Kasen was okay with yours staying in our home since I could just as easily move to the dorms to free up room," said Izuku with a shrug. Actually, Kachen said that he'd move to the dorms too. "Not surprising that after you revealed what happened he's been less of an butt and the two of you have become rather close," said Sakura. "By the way, what did All Might want to talk about after the rescue class?" "Something rather important from the way he talked about it. I have the distinct feeling I'm about to get my first supervillain. Only it's inherited. Would not surprise me. But so help me if you start making Joker or Lex Luthor references I will freeze your boxers again," said Sakura seriously. "And you said you didn't read my comics. I'm a Marvel fan over DC, and I will make you suffer takeout for a week if you tell anyone," said Sakura. "Yes, dear," said Izuku, smiling with a laugh. Hearing the story behind One for All was fascinating. All Might believed that Izuku might be the one to finally deal with All for One once and for all thanks to his gadgets. That man relied on his stolen quirks. Izuku's eraser kitty was just the sort of thing that could deal a devastating blow to his powers and those of his allies, and Izuku used One for All to augment his natural fighting style, rather than rely on it like All Might and the others before him had. That plus there was one thing All Might didn't know about Izuku: the green-haired teen wasn't afraid to kill if it meant protecting others. How many innocent lives could have been saved if Batman had simply bitten the bullet and taken out Joker and his insane girlfriend once and for all? At least in the Marvelverse, they weren't afraid to put down their dangerous enemies in a more permanent fashion. A few days later, the students got news that would devastate the less academically inclined. Those that failed the exams would be stuck in remedial hell while the others went to a summer training lodge. Izuku was secretly cackling at the faces of the others, since he was in the top 5 of the class. Finding out he would be facing All Might in a spar with Kachen had come as an amusing surprise. To be honest, Izuku was rather eager to see how they could fight together. It was a complete and utter disaster. He might have patched things up with Kachen so that they were friends again, but Bakugo was absolutely terrible at teamwork exercises. Fortunately, Izuku had experience with ill-tempered heroes, so they managed to pass the exercise, but Bakugo was still sad because they had only passed due to Izuku tripping up his favorite hero while he tossed Bakugo through the designated exit. A few hours later, "How did you do?" asked Izuku. "We managed to pass up barely," said Sakura. "If I didn't have the extra experience fighting with your eraser kitty, we would have had our buttes handed to us." "Look on the bright side. Summer vacation is upon us," said Izuku. "Too bad we're a year or so shy of taking advantage of that fact," snarked Sakura. "Considering how often certain accidents happen, I'd rather wait until certain preparations were made before we moved to that step. Besides, we're still in the early stages of properly dating this time. I want to actually enjoy it," said Izuku. "Moving too fast would just spoil things, and I want to properly court you rather than jump back into what we had." Sakura blushed at that, but didn't complain. Besides, she knew her boyfriend that he would rather wait until they found his baby again than rush things.